Hi everyone, I'm Kat. I'm a parent, a mum of two girls aged 6 and 10, and I also work at the NSPCC Helpline. Been there 13 years supporting members of the public and professionals in relation to any child protection concerns or worries that they may have. And today we're going to be spending a little bit of a time chatting to two other parents, Laura and David. Lovely to have you here. And we're going to be talking about something that for some parents, carers and people that look after children might struggle with or they may come up against, which is bullying. And it's not always an easy thing for parents to talk about, which is why we wanted to spend today just thinking about some of the ways we can help and talk to children if they're being bullied, along with a few little bits of advice, tips and support. And it's lovely to have you, Laura and David. And so we're going to fly straight in and get straight into it. So for Laura, have you ever, as a parent, had any experiences or worries about bullying?
Yes, absolutely. I am a parent of a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I definitely have had experience with my elder child. I think I've been quite lucky that I've not had any experience at younger years, but definitely as my child has got older, I've certainly had challenges that I've had to come up against and things that I've had to sort of navigate, which can be quite tricky when it's the first time.
And you talk about that navigating, and as a parent trying to you're in an unknown situation. You've dropped your child off at school age 4 thinking, have my child at 6 hours a day. You trust that school with your child and everything about that development. As a parent, how has it made you feel to have to try and navigate that bullying and that unknown about what's going on for your child?
I think the hardest bit is knowing where to start. You know, do we speak to children about bullying before it happens? Or in my case, it was very much reactive. It was like, okay, we think you are being bullied in a sense, or starting to be bullied. And again, it's really important to know what bullying is, you know, because that in itself can be quite tricky. You know, is it something that's happened once? Is it a repetitive thing? It can be really difficult for a child to understand, and actually even trickier for a parent to understand.
And how did you broach that with your child? How did you, when you had those worries about bullying, what were those conversations and how did they look for you?
I mean, I'm really lucky that we have really good open conversations at home, and we've always encouraged that dialogue and to say, you know, if it's something is making you feel sad or worried or even happy, you know, tell someone about it and, you know, share the load, and we can figure it out. And you say that to yourself in your head and it sounds like the easiest thing to do, but obviously as a parent you think, actually, what happens if you do come to me with this stuff? You know, but thank goodness she did. And then we started very much from scratch, and it was very much the emotions of how my child was feeling was the very big starting point.
And I would certainly agree with that. It's about that initial conversation and not scaring the child and not using those scary words, but having an open conversation so that they feel like they can come to you, they can talk to you. And even if it's a small worry or the biggest worry in the world, they know you're going to listen and you're going to take care of them and just protect them at all points, but not in a way that makes them scared or worried or using language that they feel is bigger than it is. And for you, David, how have you had to have those conversations, or have you had any worries about talking to children in relation to bullying behaviours or bullying worries?
Very much so. My daughter is 12 and has just started secondary school. So that was the only thing that I was thinking about when she started school. How's she going to get on with everybody? I mean, obviously you worry about the workload and homework and those sort of things, but really relationships with others. And is she going to be picked on? Is she going to be able to make friends? That was something that I was really, really concerned about. And how you broach that subject is really difficult. You don't want to make it high stakes and go, right, family meeting, let's sit down at the table, let's have this really big conversation. So I found that talking about others and those sort of things while we're doing other activities, like she loves to draw. So she'd be sitting there drawing and I go and sit next to her and we would just go, oh, what are you drawing? And we'd have a little conversation. Or the best one is car journeys, you know, because you're not looking at each other.
Definitely.
Things are happening out the window and you just open up and it's really low stakes. Those sort of things really, really help.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I'll be going through that in September with my eldest, and as a parent, it's wanting to know everything but not wanting to question a child repeatedly. And you have lots of things happening at secondary school, that transition. You've got hormones and puberty and children changing and their bodies changing, as well as suddenly they've gone from a class of 30 children and very protected in one room to suddenly going out into lots of children, 200-300 potentially, from different backgrounds, different schools, that they're having to negotiate and having to work through those relationships. And I liked when you said that about making the conversations low stake, because what you don't want to have is a situation where a child closes up or doesn't want to talk because they feel that's the only topic of conversation. And as parents, and I know I'll be going through it as well, that all you want to do is at 3:30, 4 o'clock is, what happened? Who did you talk? And bombard them because you want to know, and you want to know ultimately that as a parent, you've got children who are happy and settled and want to be at school. But talking about it low stakes is really key. Dave, you talked about those low stakes. Were there any questions you have been asking, or have you just been trying to keep it very low key? What type of things have you been talking about?
Yeah, so I really don't want it to be an interrogation, because sometimes it feels like that, and it's quite tempting to pounce on every name that she says. So if she says a new name, oh, who's that? Are they nice? Are you their friends? Where do they live? What school do they go to? It's really difficult not to do that. So I kind of ask questions like, then think, fun happened today? What was the best thing about your day? And like sort of, did anything make you sad today? Those sort of things. How did you feel about that? So really open questions and not leading questions.
Laura, you talked about your child and you talked about some concerns about bullying. How did you respond to that with the school? When you had that conversation and you were aware, what was your next step?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it is definitely really important to involve the school. I know a lot of people sort of shy away from it. I also know a lot of people probably go in there daily, which again it depends on sort of what your take is on what's happening. Within my situation, our bullying situation actually started online, and initially we actually dealt with it ourselves at home. And one of the things was sort of removing the gaming platform. So it was sort of in a way to my daughter's detriment. But at the time we sort of explained everything, and it was totally acceptable. The funny thing with bullying is that it then moves into the classroom when that bully doesn't potentially have the right avenue. So that totally threw me, to be honest. And then that is when I needed to seek help and advice from the school. If you go charging in, you're not sort of getting to the point and the root of the problem. You're absolutely not being a role model necessarily to your child, because it can be an overreaction. It can also be quite scary if you haven't sort of gained their permission, or at least just explain to them what you're going to do. We're adults, and it's our job to protect them and work alongside them if age appropriate. So with the school, absolutely, I went in very calmly, very honestly. I booked an appointment. I had everything sort of laid out in front of me. I had, whatever evidence I had, but that was my first steps. It was going to the school and just explaining calmly that we have a bit of a situation. I've partially dealt with it, but that we actually need a bit more assistance, because in order to make my child feel safe and happy at school, the school also need to take some responsibility for what is happening. And that's how I started it. And it was quite scary, to be honest, not having done it before.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with the response you had, that the initial thought and the initial reaction is to go charging into school and, like you said, say, what are you going to do about my child? But for schools, no school would want bullying to happen, and no school would want a child to be upset. Every teacher in every school should be there for the education and welfare of a child. And it's about maintaining that relationship with school. Things don't always happen or don't always work out. Things may go wrong in a school, especially if you've got hundreds of children and you're talking about young children who are trying to develop relationships. They're trying to learn boundaries, and they may have different experiences in their life. But for a school, if a parent goes in and they're calm and reassuring and trying to work with the school, that allows a greater communication. Every school will have a behaviour policy, and within that there will be a bullying action plan or a bullying statement, or even potentially a bullying policy on its own. For you, David, has that been something that you've experienced, especially as you've got a child now at secondary school, having that independence? How has that impacted their relationships and the worries you've had?
Yeah, the online world is difficult because although it's not new, there are new things all the time that I genuinely just don't understand. Like, because the social media wasn't there when I was growing up as a teenager. If I shut the door, no one could talk to me. Do you know what I mean? But now the contact is constant all the time. And that question of when did we decide to give my daughter a mobile phone and access to this online world and whatever was a really difficult question. And we eventually did it when she started to walk to and from school as a safety sort of thing. But yeah, I think it's just about being really open and honest and say, look, we're going to give you this, but these are the dangers about it, without scaring anyone about it, but this is what might happen. You need to make sure that you're open and honest with us, and we're not checking up on you, we're just keeping you safe and being really honest about it. But it is a huge issue and really difficult to tackle.
It is, and I think I smell that because I remember when I was at high school, it was the modem in the living room with the computer that parents would tell you to get off because they wanted to ring somebody, and now you've got access 24/7 potentially to these conversations. And certainly for the NSPCC, we have loads of advice on our website about privacy settings, about monitoring and manage those apps. And like you said, new apps and new social media comes up all the time, and you think that you know it as a parent and you think you're being really smart with WhatsApp and text messaging, and then there's suddenly a new app. And it's about not checking up, but having those conversations and that monitoring to say, we need to make sure you're safe. We talk about children being bullied, but sometimes it can be the other foot as well, that a child may be displaying those behaviours, struggling with those relationships. Is that anything, Laura, that you have experienced, or anything that you have worried about for your child on the other side about how they respond to others?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the first questions I had for the school, actually. I had to be very open-minded, and it's taken me probably, good, 30 odd years of being on the planet to actually accept that, your own children might not always make the right decisions and the right choices. And my advice to any parent would be just be open to that. On this occasion, thank goodness, it was very much one-sided, and sadly it's never nice. I actually felt sorry for all parties involved. It's not a nice situation for anybody. And this is one of the things that I reinforced with my child, that actually you must always be kind. You must always display and support those values and behaviors of your school, because actually this is not a situation where you can then become that sort of person. And so that is something that's really important to us, is that I'm very open-minded that my child can equally make mistakes and make bad choices and potentially be unkind to another child.
I love what you say about that when you talk about being kind, because for children, it's not an automatic thing that they know, and it's about teaching them and showing that those behaviours and modelling it as a parent and having those conversations. For you, David, when you talk about your daughter and you've talked about those worries, have you had any support from the school, or have you looked at any support networks for you as a parent when you're navigating this new world?
Yeah, well, the school were very good, actually. They had lots of good induction information. So there were open evenings, and while we're there, it was highlighted who you could go and talk to and potential websites. So the Childline website has lots of information on there for adults, but also for children. And I think just being aware that there are those sources for support if you do need it, to have a look. And also spoke to other parents as well, like at the school gate or friends or family, and just quiz them and say, especially friends who have got older children who have been through this stage already, said to them, look, what was it like for them? Like, did this happen? What was this like? And because I think for you, it feels really, really important and really high stakes, and because it's all that you're thinking about, and just because it's so personal and so close. But actually, other people say, no, that's okay. That's just part of it. They're working it out, and this will happen and that will happen. This is part of growing up and not making it feel too big. And my daughter had an issue at primary school that she wanted to be best friends. She wanted like a BFF, that sort of thing. That was the language that they used. And realize and try and explain to her that no, it's okay for you to have acquaintances. Like Laura and you were saying, that it's okay to have acquaintances that you'll be friendly with, but you don't need to be around their house all the time. You know, and they don't need to come to our house, and we don't need to be hanging out with them all the time. There's people you have relationships with in lots of different ways. So understanding that, I think, was really important as well.
Yeah, and I agree. It's about getting that support. We don't have a handbook when the baby's born, and if only we did have a parenting handbook about all the different stages. And as a parent, you get through the baby years and the toddler years, and you think, that's fine now, everything's well, they're off to school, and thankfully they're sleeping, or they're doing what I need to do. But then a new set of worries and concerns, and it never ends. And as a parent, it's okay to have those worries. There isn't one answer. There is some fantastic information on our NSPC website. Childline, as you mentioned, David, is brilliant for a young person, but also as a parent to get the language and to think about that language. But it's all right not to know the answers. And there are loads of support mechanisms for parents when you are a little bit unsure. NSPC Helpline is there just for a bit of advice and to talk, and all my fantastic colleagues will talk to parents. It doesn't have to be that we act on it or let anybody know. It may just be, as a parent, you want to say, is this okay? Or what should I do? What is my action plan? Thinking about schools, if bullying takes place and it is taking place in school, do you think schools have a responsibility to act on your complaint? So if you think they've not resolved it, how do you think schools should respond?
In my experience, and I think probably most schools, they absolutely do have a responsibility to act on it. And I think they do take that responsibility generally quite seriously. And I think that would be any complaint, whether it was bullying, whether it was anything else, maybe concern about anything. And luckily, most schools now are so big on safeguarding. They have, our programs and campaigns in, such as Speak Out, Stay Safe. They have our parent carer workshops as well, because again, we cascade the information to the children. Actually, who often most needs the most information is actually the parents. Whether we like to admit it or not, we only know what we know. And sometimes speaking to both the parents and carers or guardians of those children or relations of that children can really help. And so, yeah, absolutely, the school have a duty to deal with it. And I think their first port of call is exactly where I started, getting the information and actually finding out what's happening, being transparent with the parent about what the next steps are. And I think also from a parent's perspective, it's really important to get across what your expectations are. Is that, I would like this dealt with. And this is exactly what I said, I would like this dealt with. As parents, we might not like Googling bullying because we have to accept that it's happening in our household, but you have to be brave and take that step. Otherwise, you will not have the right tools to deal with it.
All schools are different, and all schools will have different responses to what resources they've got. But ultimately, all schools and parents want every child to be happy. That's the ultimate aim. And it may be that schools go about it in a different way, in a different path at times, but that's the end goal. But if you're not happy with the school and everything doesn't happen, or they're ignoring, or they're not responding, or you feel that you're not getting the resolution you need, you, as parents and carers, you have the option of going down the complaints policy. We would try and advise you to try and keep that relationship initially and to keep that communication. But if it gets to the point where you think that it isn't going to be resolved, every school has a complaints policy where you can ask that it is looked at and you can put a formal complaint in. And it's important that you follow that policy to step by step. If your child is being bullied on social media, but by a child at that school, but it's away from school, do you think that there's nothing that school can do? So can school do anything about it?
That's a really thorny issue, but I definitely think there are things that the school can do, especially from an education point of view. So through PSHE lessons or tutor time or school assemblies, I think it is a role for as well as parents, I think it's a role for schools to be educating young people about how they should be acting on social media. But I do know that schools like these, if you're worried about any sort of images. I know that the school can use the report remove tool or get in touch with the NSP and use those sorts of things.
And schools do still have a duty of care to their pupils. So even if there is an issue that takes place outside of school or on social media, schools cannot ignore that there is a duty of care, and they should be working with those pupils. Like you say, David, doing some education, potentially getting a PCSO in school to talk about the legalities of it and talk about what they should be doing online. But it can't be that just because it's not 9 till 3, Monday to Friday in term time, that schools wash their hands. But it's about saying school, although this has happened outside, you've got 2 pupils who are in your same school. What can you do to support them and educate them? Because this issue is probably going to spill out into school anyway. If you feel that your child is being bullied, do you think you should speak to the other parents, Laura? So you talked about going to school, and you talked about rightly talking to school. Would you consider going to the other parents?
That is such a good question. And there's no right answer. I've got a really good, solid group of mum friends who have got children in the same class. And absolutely, some of them would be amenable to being approached and have that, almost like professional parent discussion where you're both sort of like this with your hands up and your little white flag saying, oh, let's, I'll have a chat with so-and-so and I'll have a chat with so-and-so. I think that works when you have one of those tit for tat, perhaps sort of breakdowns in communication. It gets to end of term. They're a bit grumpy and tired. They've had a little tiff. They just spend a day away from each other, perhaps playing with a different friend or a different BFF, which we've all been there, David. That's exhausting, when they want a BFF. And that is absolutely appropriate in that instance. I think if it's something where, in my situation, where it's completely one-sided, I was advised not to contact the parent. I didn't feel it necessary because the school said that they were dealing with it. That parent, however, once they were contacted by the school, did contact me. And that was a very difficult thing to deal with, because you then sort of get the defense mode of, oh, well, actually, I think this is misinterpreted and this is misinterpreted. So I wouldn't normally reply. I wouldn't normally encourage others to reply without some guidance, because if you've gone into the school and you've asked them to deal with it, it can muddy the waters massively. And of course, it can cause unpleasant conflict, which can then spill out onto the streets, which you don't necessarily want. It can sometimes make things worse. On this occasion, I did reply. And what I actually did is I sent the reply and the message I got to the school to be transparent. It was necessary in this case. I wouldn't encourage it normally, because it's very much case by case, age of the child, what's actually happened, how it's occurred.
Yeah. And David, I saw you nodding there along with that really good response. What are your thoughts to responding to that other parent or to contacting the parent?
Yeah, I agree 100% with Laura. I think it's all about the relation. Is there an existing relationship there? Already, like my daughter had a little bit of a falling out with a long-term friend where on both sides it wasn't great, and it bordered on bullying from both sides, really. But we had a relationship with her friend's parents. We were friendly together. We would talk quite a lot. We would occasionally see each other socially. So we felt it was appropriate to talk to each other. And like Laura said, maybe said, look, do they need a bit of a time out? They're in each other's pockets a lot. Maybe they're both growing up, etc., etc.
I just want to say thank you to Laura. Thank you to David for joining us today. It's been a really fantastic and honest conversation. If you're looking for advice, support or guidance you can trust, you can visit nspc.org.uk/parenting and contact us at any point. That's all for now. Bye-bye.